Maria Santos had been cleaning military facilities for 3 years, but she had never seen anything quite like the Navy SEAL training compound in San Diego. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete as she pulled her cleaning cart from the back of her small Honda. At 28, Maria was the sole provider for her two young children after her husband died in a construction accident. The job at the base paid better than her previous work at office buildings, even if it meant starting at 5 in the morning. The security guard, a friendly older man named Bob, waved her through the gate. "Morning, Maria. Same routine today. The firing range needs a good sweep after yesterday's training session. Those boys sure know how to make a mess." Maria nodded and smiled. She had learned that the less she said about her work, the better. These military men seemed to appreciate quiet efficiency. She had grown up in a small town in Mexico, where her father taught her that honest work, no matter how humble, was something to be proud of. After moving to California with her late husband, she had carried that lesson with her through every job. The firing range was located at the far end of the compound, a sprawling concrete structure with multiple shooting lanes and thick walls designed to contain the sound of gunfire. As Maria approached with her cart, she could hear voices echoing from inside. The SEALs were already at work, their training starting before dawn like hers did. She had cleaned this range dozens of times before, always waiting until the training sessions ended. But today felt different. There was an intensity in the air that she couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was the way the guards at the gate had been more alert than usual, or how she had seen additional security vehicles parked around the perimeter. Maria parked her cart outside the range and began organizing her supplies. She would start with the exterior areas, sweeping the walkways and collecting the brass shell casings that always seemed to find their way into the strangest places. The work was methodical and peaceful, allowing her mind to wander to her children. 8-year-old Diego had a soccer game that evening, and 5-year-old Carmen needed help with her reading homework. These thoughts always motivated her to work efficiently. Inside the range, she could hear the sharp commands of instructors and the controlled breathing techniques the SEALs practiced before shooting. Maria had learned to recognize the rhythms of military training. There would be periods of intense focus, followed by brief discussions about technique and strategy. She had even picked up some of the terminology over the months, though she never let on that she understood more than her cleaning duties required. As she swept near one of the side entrances, Maria noticed a group of men in different uniforms talking in hushed tones with the SEAL instructors. They weren't wearing the standard Navy fatigues she was accustomed to seeing. These men had darker clothing and carried equipment she didn't recognize. Their body language suggested urgency, and she instinctively moved her cleaning to a different area to avoid any appearance of eavesdropping. Commander Jake Morrison was running the training session that morning. At 35, he was one of the most respected SEAL officers on the base, known for his calm leadership and ability to think clearly under pressure. He had noticed Maria over the past few months, impressed by her professionalism and work ethic. Unlike some civilian contractors who seemed nervous around the military personnel, she went about her duties with quiet confidence. The morning's training was focused on close-quarters combat scenarios, preparing his team for an upcoming deployment. But the briefing he had received an hour earlier had changed the entire dynamic of the day. Intelligence suggested that there might be a security threat to the base itself, though the details remained classified. Extra precautions were in place, and Morrison found himself constantly scanning the environment even during routine training. Maria continued her work, moving systematically around the exterior of the range. She had developed an efficient routine over the months, knowing exactly how long each section would take and the best order to complete her tasks. The morning air was crisp and clear, with the sound of waves from the nearby Pacific mixing with the controlled chaos of military training. As she worked near the main entrance, Maria noticed a delivery truck approaching the checkpoint. Nothing unusual about that. Supplies arrived regularly for the various training facilities. But something about the driver's behavior caught her attention. He seemed nervous, constantly checking his mirrors and adjusting his position in the seat. Maria had grown up in a neighborhood where being observant could mean the difference between safety and danger, and those instincts had never left her. The truck passed through the checkpoint and headed toward the administrative buildings. Maria returned to her sweeping, but kept one eye on the vehicle's progress. It was probably nothing. New delivery drivers often seemed anxious about navigating military facilities. But her father had always taught her to trust her instincts, and something felt off. Inside the range, Morrison was putting his team through a rapid-fire exercise when his radio crackled to life. The base security office was reporting an unscheduled delivery vehicle that had somehow bypassed standard protocols. The driver's credentials checked out, but there were discrepancies in the delivery manifest that needed verification. Morrison signaled for his team to continue their exercise while he stepped outside to assess the situation. Military bases operated on strict schedules and protocols, and any deviation from normal procedures had to be taken seriously. He had learned during his 15 years in the Navy that the smallest irregularities often preceded the biggest problems. As he emerged from the range, Morrison spotted Maria working near the entrance. Her presence reminded him that there were civilian contractors throughout the facility who might be at risk if there was indeed a security threat. The base had procedures for lockdowns and evacuations, but those procedures assumed advance warning and controlled circumstances. Maria noticed the commander's emergence and the serious expression on his face. She had learned to read the moods of the military personnel, understanding when to make herself invisible and when her work might be needed urgently. This felt like one of those moments when staying alert was more important than following routine. The delivery truck had stopped near the main administration building, about 200 yards from the firing range. From her position, Maria could see the driver getting out and moving toward the back of the vehicle. His movements seemed jerky and unnatural, not like the smooth efficiency she had observed in other delivery personnel over the months. Morrison's radio crackled again. Base security was requesting that all training personnel maintain heightened awareness while they investigated the delivery discrepancy. It was probably a paperwork error, but protocol demanded caution. He looked around the area, mentally cataloging the positions of his team members and noting the escape routes and defensive positions available if needed. Maria continued sweeping, but her attention was now divided between her work and the unfolding situation. She had positioned herself so that she could observe both the truck and the range entrance, trusting the instincts that had served her family well in difficult circumstances. The morning sun was climbing higher, and the normal sounds of the base were beginning to increase as more personnel arrived for their shifts. The driver had opened the back of the truck and was removing what appeared to be standard supply boxes. But something about his handling of the containers struck Maria as odd. He was being too careful, as if the boxes contained something fragile or dangerous. Most delivery drivers she had observed moved with practiced efficiency, but this man seemed to be concentrating intensely on every movement. Morrison decided to move closer to the administrative area to get a better assessment of the situation. As he walked, he noticed Maria working near the range entrance and made a mental note of her position. Civilian safety was always a priority during any potential security incident, and her location put her in a potentially vulnerable area if the situation escalated. The base's normal morning routine continued around them. Personnel arriving for work, vehicles moving along designated routes, the distant sound of training exercises from other facilities. But underneath the surface normalcy, Maria could sense a growing tension. It was like the feeling in her neighborhood back home when something was about to happen, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that made everyone a little more alert. As Morrison approached the administrative building, he could see the delivery driver more clearly. The man appeared to be Middle Eastern, which wasn't unusual given the diverse population of San Diego. But his behavior continued to seem off, too much nervous energy for a routine delivery, too much attention to his surroundings for someone focused on completing a simple job. Maria had moved her cleaning cart closer to the range entrance, ostensibly to sweep that area, but actually to position herself where she could continue observing. Her father had been a security guard in Mexico, and he had taught her that sometimes the best way to help was simply to pay attention and be ready to act if needed. The radio traffic was increasing. Morrison could hear security personnel coordinating their response to verify the delivery and check the driver's credentials more thoroughly. Standard protocol called for a measured response. No reason to create alarm over what was likely a paperwork error. But his combat experience had taught him that maintaining readiness was never a mistake. Inside the range, the SEAL training continued. Morrison's team was professional enough to maintain their focus on the exercises while staying alert to any changes in the situation. The sound of controlled gunfire echoed across the facility as they practiced various shooting scenarios, the sharp reports mixing with commands and tactical communication. Maria found herself thinking about her children as she worked. Diego and Carmen were safe at school, but the growing tension at the base made her more aware of how quickly situations could change. Her husband's accident had taught her that life could shift from normal to catastrophic in an instant, and she had learned to prepare mentally for the unexpected. The delivery driver had finished unloading his truck and was now walking toward the administrative building with a clipboard, presumably to get delivery confirmation signatures. His movements still seemed unnatural to Maria, though she couldn't articulate exactly what was bothering her. It was more of a feeling than anything specific, the same instinct that had helped her family navigate difficult neighborhoods and uncertain situations. Morrison's radio crackled with an update from base security. The driver's credentials were legitimate, but there was a discrepancy in the timing of the delivery. The shipment wasn't scheduled to arrive until the following day, and the early arrival couldn't be explained by traffic conditions or route changes. Security was requesting additional verification before allowing the driver to leave the base. As Maria continued her work, she noticed that the delivery driver had entered the administrative building but hadn't emerged after what seemed like an appropriate amount of time for getting signatures. The truck sat empty in the parking area, its back doors still open as if the driver intended to return quickly. But the minutes were stretching longer than normal. The morning sun was now fully illuminating the base, and the regular flow of personnel and vehicles had increased. But Maria could sense that some of the military personnel were moving with more purpose than usual, their body language suggesting heightened awareness even as they went about their normal duties. Morrison decided to return to the firing range to check on his team while maintaining radio contact with base security. The situation might be nothing, but his training had taught him to prepare for multiple contingencies. As he walked back toward the range, he noticed Maria still working near the entrance, her cleaning thorough and professional despite the unusual activity around the base. The SEAL training exercise was reaching its culmination, with team members demonstrating their proficiency in various combat scenarios. The controlled environment of the range allowed them to push their skills to the limit while maintaining complete safety protocols. But Morrison found his attention divided between evaluating his team's performance and monitoring the security situation. Maria had finished sweeping the main walkway and was beginning to collect brass casings from around the range perimeter. This was always one of her favorite parts of the job. The small brass shells were satisfying to collect, and finding them in unexpected places had become a sort of treasure hunt. But today, her movements were more cautious as she stayed alert to the developing situation. The radio traffic indicated that base security was still trying to locate the delivery driver, who hadn't been seen leaving the administrative building despite completing his delivery over 20 minutes earlier. Building security cameras were being reviewed, and additional personnel were being quietly positioned around the facility. Morrison's team completed their training exercise with their usual excellence, but he could see that they had also picked up on the subtle changes in the base's atmosphere. SEALs were trained to be constantly aware of their environment, and the increased radio traffic and security activity hadn't gone unnoticed. As Maria worked her way around the range perimeter, She found herself in a position where she could see both the administrative building and several other key facilities on the base. From this vantage point, she noticed something that made her pause in her sweeping. There were people moving on the roof of one of the buildings, figures that seemed to be positioning equipment or supplies in locations that weren't part of the normal base activity. The morning was progressing toward what should have been a routine transition between training shifts, but the underlying tension continued to build. Maria had learned to recognize the difference between normal military alertness and the kind of focused readiness that suggested real danger might be approaching. Morrison made the decision to keep his team at the range rather than dismissing them for their normal break. Something about the overall situation was triggering his combat instincts, and he wanted his most experienced personnel ready and available if needed. The decision proved prescient as his radio suddenly exploded with urgent traffic from base security. The first explosion came from the direction of the administrative building, a sharp crack followed by the rumble of collapsing concrete and the immediate wail of alarms. Maria felt the ground shake beneath her feet and instinctively dropped to a crouch behind her cleaning cart, her heart hammering as years of living in dangerous neighborhoods kicked in. The peaceful morning had shattered into chaos in the span of seconds. Morrison's voice cut through the noise on his radio, calm despite the circumstances. All personnel, this is Commander Morrison. We have explosions on base. Implement lockdown protocols immediately. All civilians take cover and await further instructions. His team was already moving into defensive positions around the firing range, their training transforming them from students into warriors in an instant. Black smoke was rising from multiple locations across the base now. Maria could see figures moving between buildings, but they weren't wearing the familiar uniforms of base personnel. These men moved with purpose and carried weapons she recognized from news reports about conflicts in other parts of the world. The delivery truck had been a Trojan horse, and now armed attackers were spreading across the facility. The sound of automatic gunfire erupted from the direction of the main gate. Maria pressed herself closer to the ground, remembering her father's advice about staying low when bullets were flying. She had never imagined that the skills learned growing up in rough neighborhoods would be needed on an American military base, but survival instincts were survival instincts. Morrison was coordinating with base security while simultaneously positioning his 8-man SEAL team to defend the firing range and protect the civilian contractors in the area. The range's thick concrete walls provided excellent cover, and the facility's design offered multiple defensive advantages. But they were dealing with an unknown number of attackers who had clearly planned their assault carefully. "Maria," Morrison called out, spotting her crouched behind the cleaning cart about 50 yards from the range entrance. "Get inside the building now. Move fast but stay low." Maria didn't hesitate. She abandoned her cart and sprinted toward the firing range, keeping her head down as more explosions echoed across the base. The distance felt like miles, but Morrison's team provided covering positions as she ran. Behind her, she could hear the crack of rifle fire getting closer. As she reached the entrance, Morrison grabbed her arm and pulled her inside. The thick walls immediately muffled the sounds of combat outside, but the urgency in everyone's movements made it clear that the danger was far from over. The firing range had become an impromptu fortress, with the SEAL team preparing defensive positions at every entrance and window. "Stay in the center of the room," Morrison instructed Maria, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Away from windows and doors. We're going to hold this position until reinforcements arrive." He turned to his team. "Rodriguez, get on the radio and coordinate with base security. Chun, cover the north entrance. Williams, you, and Jackson take the south side." Maria found herself crouched in the center of the range, surrounded by the familiar shooting lanes where she had swept up brass casings just minutes earlier. But now those same lanes were being converted into defensive positions, with SEALs checking their weapons and preparing for what might be a prolonged firefight. The radio chatter was intense, but controlled. Base security was reporting multiple breaches, with attackers moving toward several key facilities, including the communications center and the armory. The initial explosions had been coordinated to create maximum confusion and disable quick response capabilities. This wasn't a random attack. It was a sophisticated military operation. Through the small windows of the firing range, Maria could see smoke rising from at least 4 different locations on the base. The attackers had done their homework, targeting critical infrastructure first to prevent organized resistance. But they hadn't counted on encountering a full SEAL team that was already armed and in position. Morrison was studying a tactical map of the base, identifying likely attack routes and defensive choke points. His 15 years of experience in combat zones around the world had prepared him for exactly this type of scenario, though he had never expected to face it on American soil. The irony wasn't lost on him that the firing range where his team practiced for overseas missions had become their actual battlefield. Commander Rodriguez called from his radio position. Base security is reporting at least 15 attackers, possibly more. They've got military-grade weapons and explosives. Some of our people are trapped in the admin building, and the main gate is under heavy fire. Maria listened to the tactical discussions around her, understanding more than she let on thanks to months of overhearing military conversations during her cleaning work. The situation was serious. The attackers had achieved tactical surprise and were pressing their advantage. But she was also learning something about the men protecting her. Their calm professionalism under fire was remarkable. The sound of approaching gunfire grew louder. Morrison's team was tracking the movement of attackers through their radio network and visual observation. It appeared that one group was moving directly toward the firing range, probably seeking to eliminate the organized resistance they had encountered. Contact front. Williams called from his south entrance. 4 Tangos approaching through the vehicle yard, approximately 200 meters, and closing. Morrison moved to a position where he could observe the approaching threat while staying in communication with his team. The attackers were moving tactically, using vehicles and equipment for cover as they advanced. They were trained soldiers, not random terrorists, which made them more dangerous but also more predictable. Morrison said, moving toward her position in the center of the range. I need to ask you something important. Have you ever fired a weapon before? The question surprised her, but she answered honestly. My father taught me to shoot when I was young, back in Mexico. We had rifles on our farm for protection against wild animals. But that was many years ago. Morrison nodded. The situation outside is getting worse, and we might need every person who can help. I'm not asking you to be a soldier, but if it comes down to defending this position, would you be willing to use a weapon? Maria thought about her children, about Diego's soccer game that evening, and Carmen's reading homework. She thought about the life her husband had died trying to build for their family, and about the steady work that had brought her to this moment. If I have to protect myself and help you protect others, yes, I will do what is necessary. Morrison handed her a standard M4 rifle from the range's weapons rack. This is similar to what your father probably taught you with, just more advanced. The basics are the same: safety, sight alignment, trigger control. Chun will give you a quick refresher while we maintain our defensive positions. Chun, a young SEAL who looked barely older than Maria herself, quickly showed her the weapon's basic operation. Maria's hands remembered more than her mind did. The weight of the rifle, the proper stance, the sight picture her father had drilled into her during those evenings on their small farm. It felt strange to be holding a weapon in the place where she had quietly swept floors, but the muscle memory was reassuring. The sound of the approaching firefight grew closer. Through the radio, they could hear other units on the base reporting their status and coordinating defensive actions. But the firing range was isolated enough that Morrison's team would be fighting largely on their own until reinforcements could break through the attackers' positions. Visual on targets, Jackson reported from a north entrance. 3 more approaching from the admin building direction. Looks like they're trying to coordinate a 2-sided assault on our position. Morrison was now facing a classic military problem. defending a fixed position against superior numbers with mixed capabilities among his defenders. But he also had advantages: excellent defensive terrain, superior training, and the element of surprise, since the attackers probably didn't expect to encounter organized resistance this far from the main security areas. Maria found herself positioned behind one of the shooting benches. The rifle Chun had given her loaded and ready, but pointed safely downward. The SEAL beside her, Williams, was calmly checking his equipment and preparing for contact. His steady breathing and controlled movements were somehow reassuring even in the midst of chaos. "Remember," Williams said quietly to Maria, "if shooting starts, stay behind cover and only fire when you have a clear target. Don't worry about being perfect. Just be safe and help us keep them back." The first shots came from the south side of the building, sharp cracks of rifle fire followed by the deeper boom of return fire from the SEAL's weapons. Maria could hear bullets hitting the concrete walls, a sound like deadly hail that made her press closer to her cover position. But the thick walls were doing their job. The firing range had been built to contain much more powerful weapons than the attackers were using. Morrison was moving between positions, coordinating his team's response and maintaining communication with base security. The professional calm in his voice never wavered, even as the intensity of the firefight increased. Maria realized she was witnessing something remarkable: elite soldiers doing exactly what they had trained for years to do. "They're probing our defenses," Morrison explained to his team, "looking for weak spots before they commit to a full assault. Stay disciplined, conserve ammunition, and make every shot count." Through the small windows, Maria could see muzzle flashes from the attackers' positions. They were using the base's own infrastructure for cover, hiding behind vehicles and equipment as they tried to find angles to attack the firing range. But Morrison's team had positioned themselves expertly, covering every approach with overlapping fields of fire. The radio brought updates from across the base. Security teams were rallying and beginning to push back against the attackers, but the situation remained critical. The initial surprise had given the assault team significant advantages, and they were exploiting those advantages professionally. This wasn't going to be a quick resolution. Chin had taken a position near Maria, and she could see him calmly adjusting his scope and preparing for precision shots. Despite being one of the youngest members of the team, his movements showed the same professional competence as the veterans. Maria realized that her safety depended on these men, and that thought motivated her to stay alert and ready to help however she could. The sound pattern of the gunfight was becoming familiar: bursts of automatic fire from the attackers, followed by carefully controlled responses from SEALs. Morrison's team was using their ammunition efficiently, taking time to aim and making each shot count rather than spraying bullets wildly. It was a different kind of fighting than what Maria had seen in movies, more calculated and precise. "Movement on the east side," Rodriguez reported. "Looks like they're trying to flank around the vehicle maintenance area." Morrison studied his tactical map again. The attackers were learning the layout of the defensive position and adapting their approach. They were trying to force the SEALs to divide their attention and create openings for a coordinated assault. It was exactly what Morrison would do in their situation, which made it both predictable and dangerous. "Williams, Chun, redeploy to cover the east approach," Morrison ordered. "Jackson, Rodriguez, maintain south and north coverage. Maria, you stay with me at the central position where you can support whoever needs it most." Maria felt the weight of responsibility in Morrison's words. She wasn't just a civilian taking shelter anymore. She was part of the defensive plan. The rifle in her hands suddenly felt more significant, not just a tool for protection, but a contribution to the survival of everyone in the building. The attackers' next assault came from multiple directions simultaneously, exactly as Morrison had predicted. The sound of gunfire exploded around the firing range as bullets struck the walls and windows from several angles. Maria pressed herself against her cover position, but kept her rifle ready, watching Morrison for signals about where she might be needed. Chen called out from the east position. Multiple targets advancing through the maintenance area. I count at least 6, moving tactically with cover. The intensity of the fight was escalating. Maria could hear the different sounds of various weapons, the sharp crack of rifles, the deeper chatter of automatic weapons, and the distinctive pops of explosions that suggested the attackers were using grenades to try to break down the range's defenses. Morrison moved to support Chen's position, leaving Maria with Williams at the central defensive point. Williams glanced at her with a reassuring nod. "You're doing great. Stay ready, and if I tell you to shoot, just aim center mass and squeeze the trigger like your father taught you." Through the chaos of the firefight, Maria found herself thinking with surprising clarity. Her father's lessons on the farm, her experience navigating dangerous neighborhoods, and her determination to survive for her children's sake were all combining to help her function in this impossible situation. She wasn't a soldier, but she was a survivor. The radio crackled with an update that changed everything. "All defensive positions, this is base security. Reinforcements are moving toward your location, but they're still 20 minutes out. Hold your positions and prepare for sustained contact." 20 minutes. Maria calculated quickly. At the current intensity of fighting, 20 minutes felt like an eternity. But looking around at Morrison's team, seeing their calm professionalism and tactical expertise, she began to believe they could hold out. These men were exactly what their reputation suggested, the best of the best. The next phase of the assault was about to begin, and Maria Santos, who had come to sweep a firing range, was about to discover what she was truly capable of when everything was on the line. The sustained assault began with a coordinated explosion that shook the entire firing range. The attackers had positioned explosive charges against the building's exterior wall, attempting to create a breach that would allow them direct entry. But the range's reinforced construction held, leaving only a cloud of dust and debris while Morrison's team maintained their defensive positions. "They're getting desperate," Morrison observed, his voice cutting through the ringing in everyone's ears from the explosion. "That blast probably used up most of their remaining explosives. They'll have to try a direct assault now." Maria found herself surprisingly calm despite the violence erupting around her. Perhaps it was the steady professionalism of the SEALs, or maybe her own survival instincts had kicked in completely. Whatever the reason, she was thinking clearly and staying ready to act. The rifle in her hands no longer felt foreign. It felt like a tool she knew how to use. Chen's voice came sharp and urgent from the east position. "Multiple targets approaching. They're using smoke grenades to cover their advance. I count at least 8 moving toward our position." Morrison moved quickly to assess the situation. The attackers were adapting their tactics, using smoke to conceal their movements as they closed the distance to the firing range. It was a sound military technique, but it also created opportunities for defenders who knew how to exploit the confusion. "Everyone stay calm," Morrison instructed. "Smoke works both ways. They can't see us any better than we can see them. Wait for clear targets and make your shots count." The gray-white smoke was drifting across the area outside the range, creating an eerie twilight effect in the morning sunshine. Maria could see shadows moving within the smoke clouds, indistinct figures that might be attackers or might be shifting shadows. The uncertainty was almost worse than clear danger. Williams, positioned beside Maria at the central defense point, was tracking movement through his scope. "I've got motion at 2 o'clock, about 40 meters out. Looks like at least 3 individuals moving toward the south entrance." The radio brought more updates from across the base. Security teams were pushing back against the attackers in several areas, but the assault on the firing range had become a major focus of the enemy's effort. They seemed determined to eliminate the organized resistance that Morrison's SEAL team represented. Rodriguez called from the communications position. "Base security reports that reinforcements are 15 minutes out, but they're encountering heavy resistance at the main access routes. The attackers positioned blocking forces to slow down any response." 15 minutes still felt like an eternity, but it was progress. Maria adjusted her position slightly, maintaining her rifle's readiness while staying behind the solid cover of the shooting bench. She could see Morrison moving between his team members, checking on each position and coordinating their defense with the calm efficiency that had made him a respected leader. The first attacker to emerge clearly from the smoke appeared at the south entrance, about 30 yards from Williams' position. The man was carrying an assault rifle and moving with obvious military training, but his focus was on the building ahead of him rather than the defensive positions inside. Williams took the shot with the precise timing of a professional sniper. The sharp crack of his rifle was followed immediately by the attacker stumbling and falling, his weapon clattering across the concrete. Maria had never seen combat before, but she recognized the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Contact left, Jackson shouted from the north side. 2 targets moving through the vehicle yard. The gunfight erupted again, with muzzle flashes visible through the smoke as attackers and defenders exchanged fire. Maria could hear bullets striking the concrete walls and the sharp ping of ricochets, but Morrison's team was holding their positions and returning accurate fire. Chen's calm voice cut through the noise. "I've got eyes on the east approach. 4 targets using the maintenance equipment for cover. They're setting up for a coordinated push." Morrison made a quick tactical decision. "Rodriguez, leave the radio and support Chun on the east side. Maria, can you monitor the radio communications and relay any important updates?" Maria nodded and moved to the radio position. The equipment was more sophisticated than anything she had used before, but the basic operation was intuitive. She could hear multiple conversations from different units across the base, painting a picture of the overall battle that was both encouraging and sobering. Base security was making progress in several areas, but the attackers had been well prepared and were fighting with professional skill. The assault on the firing range was just one part of a larger operation that had been planned carefully to maximize damage and confusion. But the quick response of personnel like Morrison's team was disrupting their timeline. "Commander Morrison," Maria called out, "base security is reporting that they've cleared the administrative building and are moving toward our position. But they estimate another 10 minutes before they can provide direct support." Morrison acknowledged the information while maintaining his focus on the immediate tactical situation. His team was performing exactly as trained, but the sustained pressure was beginning to test their ammunition supplies and endurance. Every shot had to count, and every defensive position had to be held. The smoke outside was beginning to clear, revealing the positions of several attackers who were much closer to the building than anyone had expected. They had used the concealment effectively, advancing to within 20 yards of multiple entrances while the defenders were focused on more distant threats. "Close contact," Williams shouted as an attacker appeared directly outside his window, assault rifle raised and ready to fire into the building. Maria saw the threat before Williams could adjust his position to engage. The attacker was at an angle that put him outside Williams' field of fire, but directly in line with Maria's position at the radio station. Without conscious thought, she raised her rifle, found the sight picture her father had taught her years ago on their farm, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean and immediate. The attacker stumbled backward and fell, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the air as he lost his footing. Maria felt a moment of shock at what she had done, followed immediately by determination. These men were trying to kill her, and the people protecting her, and she would not be a passive victim. "Excellent shot," Morrison called out. "Maria, you may have just saved Williams' life." Williams nodded his thanks, already refocusing on his sector of responsibility. But Maria could see the respect in his expression. She had proven herself as more than just a civilian to be protected. She was contributing to their survival. The radio chattered with more updates. Security teams were converging on the firing range area from multiple directions, but they were still encountering resistance from attackers who had positioned themselves strategically around the facility. The initial surprise assault was evolving into a running gun battle across the entire base. Chen called out another contact from the east side. 3 more advancing through the maintenance area. They're moving fast and coordinated. Morrison deployed his remaining team members to meet this new threat while maintaining coverage of the other approaches. The defenders were now stretched thin, covering multiple angles of attack with a small team. But their superior training and excellent defensive positions were making the difference. Maria found herself naturally adapting to the rhythm of combat communications. She was monitoring the radio traffic, tracking the overall situation, and providing updates to Morrison while staying ready to engage targets with her rifle if needed. The morning's cleaning routine felt like something from another lifetime. The sound of approaching helicopters added a new element to the battle. Through the radio, Maria learned that base security was bringing in aerial support to help coordinate the response and provide reconnaissance on attacker positions. The tide was beginning to turn, but the immediate threat to the firing range remained critical. Multiple contacts from the south. Rodriguez reported as he engaged targets from his new position supporting Chen. They're making a coordinated push on our position. The intensity of the firefight reached a new level as attackers pressed forward from 3 directions simultaneously. Muzzle flashes lit up the smoke-filled area around the building, and the sound of automatic weapons fire echoed continuously. Maria pressed herself against her cover position, but kept her rifle ready, watching for any opportunity to support the defense. Morrison was moving between positions, encouraging his team and coordinating their fire to maximum effect. Despite being outnumbered, his SEALs were making every shot count and using their superior training to maintain control of the situation. But ammunition was becoming a concern, and the sustained pressure was testing everyone's endurance. "I'm low on ammo," Jackson called from the north position. "Same here," Chen added from the east side. Morrison made another quick decision. "Maria, there's additional ammunition in the storage locker behind you. Can you help distribute magazines to whoever needs them?" Maria moved quickly to the storage area, finding boxes of ammunition and loaded magazines. The weight of the military equipment reminded her of helping her father maintain their farm's rifles, though the stakes were infinitely higher now. She began moving ammunition to each position, staying low and moving quickly between cover points. As she delivered magazines to Chen's position, Maria could see through his window that the attackers were regrouping for what appeared to be a final assault. They had taken casualties during their previous attempts, but they still had enough personnel to pose a serious threat. The next few minutes would determine the outcome of the entire engagement. The radio brought the best news of the morning. "All defensive positions, this is base security. We have teams moving into position to support you. Maintain your current positions and prepare for coordinated counter-assault in approximately 3 minutes." 3 minutes. Maria returned to her position at the radio station, checking her rifle and preparing for what would likely be the most intense part of the entire battle. Around her, Morrison's team was making final preparations, checking equipment, and ensuring they had clear fields of fire for the coming engagement. Morrison gathered his team's attention for final instructions. "Everyone has performed exceptionally. We've held this position against superior numbers and protected ourselves and our civilian contractor. In 3 minutes, we're going to finish this fight with support from base security. Stay disciplined, stay professional, and let's bring everyone home safe." The final assault began with coordinated fire from multiple directions as the attackers made their last desperate attempt to overrun the firing range. But this time they were caught between Morrison's defenders and the arriving security teams, trapped in a crossfire that quickly ended their ability to continue fighting. Maria found herself firing carefully aimed shots at targets, trying to escape the closing trap. Her father's training serving her well in circumstances he could never have imagined. The woman who had come to sweep floors that morning was helping to end a terrorist assault on an American military base. When the shooting finally stopped, the silence felt almost unnatural. Morrison's team began the careful process of checking the area and ensuring all threats had been eliminated. Maria sat behind her cover position, still holding her rifle, hardly believing that she had survived and contributed to one of the most intense combat situations any of them would ever experience. "Maria," Morrison said as he approached her position, "I don't know how to thank you. You stepped up when we needed you most, and you may have saved all our lives with your actions today." Maria looked around at the men who had protected her and whom she had helped protect in return. "Commander, I came here this morning to clean floors and do honest work to support my family. I never imagined I would be fighting beside Navy SEALs. But sometimes life demands that we do more than we thought we could." As base security teams secure the area and began the investigation into the attack, Maria realized that her life had changed permanently. She would never again be just a civilian contractor doing her job in the background. She had proven herself under fire alongside some of America's most elite warriors, and that experience would shape everything that followed. The morning sun was now fully illuminating the base, revealing the damage from the attack, but also highlighting the successful defense that had prevented a much greater catastrophe. Maria Santos had answered the call when it came, and she had helped save lives through courage she never knew she possessed. Diego's soccer game and Carmen's reading homework were still waiting for her that evening, and she would be there for both. But she would also carry with her the knowledge that when everything was on the line, she had stood with heroes and proven herself worthy of their respect and trust.